The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the abandoned warehouse as Marcus pressed the cold steel barrel against the woman's temple. His hands shook slightly, not from fear but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. 3 months of careful planning had led to this moment, and he wasn't about to let his nerves ruin everything now. "You know why you're here," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm outside. The woman knelt on the concrete floor, her wrists bound with zip ties, her dark hair falling like a curtain across her face. She hadn't spoken a word since he'd grabbed her from the parking lot behind the diner where she worked the night shift. Marcus had been watching Sarah Chen for weeks. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she finished her shift at exactly 11:30, walked to her beat-up Honda Civic, and drove the same route home to her small apartment on the east side of town. She was predictable, isolated, and perfect for what he needed to accomplish. What Marcus didn't know was that Sarah had been watching him too. 3 days earlier, she had noticed the man in the black baseball cap, lingering near the dumpster, behind Tony's all-night diner. Most people would have dismissed it as coincidence, but Sarah wasn't most people. Years of moving through shadows had taught her to recognize when she was being hunted. The way he positioned himself to observe her exit, the careful distance he maintained, the deliberate casualness of his movements. All of it screamed amateur surveillance. Sarah had spent 15 years perfecting the art of becoming invisible. By day, she was a quiet waitress who served coffee and took orders with a polite smile. By night, she was something else entirely. The newspapers had given her various names over the years: the Night Forest Phantom, the Shadow Walker, the Silent Guardian. She preferred to think of herself simply as someone who balanced the scales when the system failed. The irony wasn't lost on her that Marcus Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, had chosen her as his victim. She had been tracking him for 2 months, ever since his name appeared on a list she'd acquired from a particularly chatty informant. Marcus thought he was clever, but his digital footprint told a different story. Late-night visits to specific forums, purchases that didn't match his legitimate income, and most damning of all, the photographs hidden on his encrypted drives. Marcus believed he was about to claim his first victim. Sarah knew she was about to claim her 47th. "The families deserve justice," Marcus continued, pressing the gun harder against her skull. "You think you can just disappear into the night after what you did? After what you took from them?" Sarah almost smiled at the delicious irony. Marcus thought he had captured the person responsible for the recent string of disappearances that had the local police baffled. 3 men had vanished over the past 6 months, leaving behind only their abandoned cars and no trace of where they might have gone. What the police didn't know, and what Marcus had apparently convinced himself he'd figured out, was that those 3 men had shared more than just bad luck. Each of them had been a predator who had slipped through the cracks of the justice system. Robert Haynes, who had walked free on a technicality despite overwhelming evidence that he had been stalking and assaulting women for years. David Kowalski, whose expensive lawyers had gotten him a suspended sentence for crimes that should have put him away for life. And Jeremy Liu, who had somehow convinced a jury that his victims were lying despite the mountain of evidence against him. Sarah had spent months learning their patterns, understanding their weaknesses, and planning their removal from society. She took no pleasure in what she did, but she slept better knowing that certain monsters could no longer hurt innocent people. The work was necessary, methodical, and clean. She left no evidence, created no scenes, and made no mistakes. Until tonight, apparently. "I know you killed them," Marcus said, his breath hot against her ear. "I know you're the one the police are looking for. Robert was my brother." Sarah's mind quickly processed this new information. Robert Haynes had been Marcus Chen's brother, which explained the different surnames. It also explained why an otherwise unremarkable warehouse worker had suddenly developed an interest in vigilante justice. Grief and anger were powerful motivators, but they also made people sloppy. Marcus had made several critical errors in his pursuit of what he believed to be justice. First, he had assumed that because the 3 victims had disappeared without a trace, their killer must be someone close to them, someone who could blend in and avoid suspicion. His investigation had led him to focus on women who worked late shifts in the area, reasoning that a female killer would be less likely to arouse suspicion. Second, he had relied too heavily on circumstantial evidence and confirmation bias. Sarah's work schedule placed her in the general vicinity when 2 of the 3 disappearances had occurred, and her quiet demeanor fit his profile of someone hiding a dark secret. He had convinced himself that correlation implied causation, without bothering to dig deeper. Most importantly, Marcus had underestimated his target in ways that would prove fatal. Robert was innocent. Marcus continued, his voice cracking with emotion. He was trying to get his life back together after that trial. Those women lied about him, and now he's dead because of it. Sarah knew better than to argue with a grieving brother's delusions, but Robert Haynes had been anything but innocent. The evidence she had collected during her investigation painted a picture of a man who had perfected the art of psychological manipulation and had used his charm and intelligence to select and terrorize his victims. The women who had testified against him hadn't been lying. They had been brave enough to speak truth to power, only to watch the system fail them. "You're going to tell me where you dumped his body," Marcus demanded, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You're going to tell me everything, and then we're going to call this in to the police. You're going to face justice for what you did." Sarah finally lifted her head and looked at Marcus directly for the first time since he had grabbed her. In the dim light filtering through the warehouse windows, her eyes appeared almost black, reflecting none of the fear he expected to see. Instead, there was something else there. Something that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. "Marcus Chen," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the gun pressed against her temple. 28 years old. You work the night shift at Brookstone Manufacturing. You drive a blue 2019 Ford Focus with a dented rear bumper from where you backed into a fire hydrant last month. You live alone in apartment 4B at the Riverside Complex, and you have a scar on your left hand from when you tried to fix your garbage disposal without turning off the power. Marcus's eyes widened in shock. "How do you—" "You've been watching me for 3 weeks," Sarah continued, her tone conversational. "But I've been watching you for 2 months. Since the day your name appeared on a very interesting list I acquired from someone who used to move in the same circles as your late brother." The color drained from Marcus's face as the implications of her words began to sink in. "That's impossible. You never what? Never visited those forums where Robert liked to share his stories? Never helped him move those boxes from his apartment after the trial? Never wondered what was in them?" Marcus's hand began to tremble more violently. "You're lying. I found them, Marcus. All of Robert's trophies. All of his photographs. All of his detailed notes. About the women he hurt. I found them in your storage unit, along with some interesting additions that weren't there when Robert was alive." Sarah could see the exact moment when Marcus realized that his world was about to come crashing down around him. The storage unit had been his mistake. He had thought he was preserving his brother's memory by keeping Robert's possessions, not realizing that he was also preserving evidence of crimes that went far beyond what had been presented at trial. "But that's not why you're really here, is it, Marcus?" Sarah asked, shifting slightly despite her restraints. "You didn't grab me because you think I killed Robert. You grabbed me because you know I'm going to find out what you've been doing with Robert's collection." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain against the warehouse roof and Marcus's increasingly labored breathing. Sarah had seen this look before. The moment when a predator realizes that their prey has teeth. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Jennifer Martinez, 19 years old, works at the coffee shop on 5th Street. You've been following her for 6 weeks. Taking pictures, learning her schedule. You even know which window in her apartment doesn't have a proper lock." Marcus backed away from Sarah completely now, the gun wavering in his grip. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because hunting monsters is what I do, Marcus. It's what I've been doing for 15 years, and right now, I'm looking at monster number 48. The warehouse fell silent again as the weight of the situation settled over both of them. Marcus had come here believing he was delivering justice to a killer. Instead, he had walked into the carefully laid trap of someone who had been planning his disappearance for weeks. Sarah tested her restraints again and found them exactly as she expected. Tight enough to convince Marcus that she was helpless, but positioned in a way that would allow her to slip free when the time was right. The zip ties weren't the issue. The challenge was timing her escape perfectly so that Marcus didn't have a chance to use the gun effectively. "You're insane," Marcus said, his voice rising in pitch. "I'm thorough," Sarah corrected. "I spent 2 months learning everything about you, Marcus. I know about the cameras you installed in Jennifer's building. I know about the key you had made to her apartment. I know about the detailed plans you wrote down, describing exactly what you intended to do to her." Marcus was hyperventilating now, his free hand pressed against the wall for support. "I never hurt anyone. I never actually did anything." "Not yet," Sarah agreed. "But we both know it was only a matter of time. The planning, the surveillance, the preparation. You were just building up the courage to take that final step." "You can't prove any of this," Marcus said desperately. "Even if what you're saying is true, you can't prove it." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the warehouse. The implications of her statement hung in the air like a threat. Marcus was beginning to understand that he hadn't stumbled onto evidence of Sarah's crimes. He had stumbled into her web. Every move he had made over the past 3 weeks had been anticipated and accounted for. "The police will find your body," Marcus said, raising the gun again with shaking hands. "They'll know I was here. They'll arrest me." Quote, "No," Sarah said calmly. "They won't." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the lights in the warehouse went out completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. In the confusion that followed, Marcus heard a sound that would haunt his nightmares for the brief time he had left. The soft whisper of zip ties being cut, followed by the almost silent footsteps of someone moving through the darkness with deadly precision. Marcus fired 3 shots into the black void, the muzzle flashes temporarily illuminating empty space. He spun in circles, trying to track movement he could only imagine, his breath coming in sharp gasps as panic overwhelmed his ability to think rationally. "Sarah?" he called out, his voice cracking. "Sarah, where are you?" The only response was the echo of his own voice bouncing off the warehouse walls and the steady drumming of rain overhead. Marcus fumbled for his phone, trying to activate its flashlight, but his hands were shaking too badly to operate the device effectively. When the lights suddenly came back on, Marcus found himself alone in the warehouse. The chair where Sarah had been sitting was empty, the cut zip ties lying on the concrete floor. The woman who had been his helpless victim just minutes before had vanished without a trace. Marcus spun around frantically, checking every shadow and corner of the warehouse, but Sarah was simply gone. It was as if she had never been there at all, except for the lingering scent of her perfume and the undeniable evidence that his carefully planned revenge had gone horribly wrong. As Marcus stood there trying to process what had just happened, he failed to notice the small device that had been placed on the electrical panel near the warehouse entrance. He also failed to notice that his phone was no longer in his jacket pocket, though he wouldn't realize it was missing for several more minutes. By the time Marcus finally worked up the courage to leave the warehouse and return to his car, Sarah Chen had already uploaded the contents of his phone to a secure server and was reviewing the evidence of his crimes from the comfort of her own apartment 3 miles away. The hunter had become the hunted, and Marcus Chen had less than 24 hours left to live. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment clutching the gun, jumping at every sound in the hallway, every creak of the building settling, every car that passed by his window. The woman who called herself Sarah Chen had vanished from the warehouse like smoke, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of dread that made his skin crawl. By dawn, Marcus had convinced himself that he had imagined the whole thing. The stress of losing Robert, the obsession with finding his brother's killer, the weeks of surveillance and planning, it had all taken a toll on his mental state. Maybe the woman in the warehouse had been exactly what she appeared to be, a frightened waitress who had somehow managed to escape when the lights went out. But when Marcus finally worked up the courage to check his phone, his blood turned to ice. The device was completely wiped clean. Every photo, every contact, Every message, gone. Even worse, when he tried to log into his email and social media accounts, all of his passwords had been changed. Someone had systematically erased his digital existence overnight. The laptop in his bedroom told the same story. Files deleted, browsers cleared, accounts locked. But whoever had done this hadn't just destroyed his data. They had left something behind. A single folder on his desktop, labeled "README," contained a document that made Marcus's hands shake as he read it. The file contained detailed information about his surveillance activities, complete with timestamps and locations, photos of him following Jennifer Martinez, screenshots of the forums he had visited, copies of the notes he thought he had hidden. But most terrifying of all was the final page. A complete floor plan of his apartment building, with his unit marked in red, and a notation that simply read, "Tomorrow, 3 a.m." Marcus packed a bag with trembling hands and checked into a motel on the other side of town, paying cash and using a fake name. He told himself that he was being paranoid, but every instinct he possessed screamed that he was in mortal danger. The woman from the warehouse, whoever she really was, had made it clear that she knew everything about him and had the skills to back up her threats. The motel room was on the second floor with a view of the parking lot. Marcus positioned himself by the window and watched for any sign of surveillance. But the night passed without incident. When morning came, he allowed himself to hope that maybe he had overreacted. Maybe the mysterious Sarah Chen had simply wanted to scare him into leaving Jennifer Martinez alone. That hope died when Marcus checked the local news and saw Jennifer's face staring back at him from his phone screen. The headline read, "Local college student found dead in apparent suicide." The article described how Jennifer Martinez had been discovered in her apartment by her roommate, having apparently taken her own life during the night. The police found no signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play, and a handwritten note that explained her decision to end her life. Marcus knew immediately that it wasn't suicide. Jennifer Martinez had been murdered, and he was supposed to be the prime suspect. The timing was too perfect, the circumstances too convenient. Someone had killed that innocent girl and arranged things so that Marcus would take the blame. But when Marcus tried to call the police to report what he knew, he discovered that his phone service had been disconnected. The prepaid card he had used to pay for the motel room was declined when he tried to extend his stay. His bank accounts were frozen pending an investigation into suspicious activity. In the span of 24 hours, Marcus Chen had been effectively erased from the modern world. By noon, Marcus was walking through the city with nothing but the clothes on his back and the gun in his jacket. Every person he passed seemed to be watching him. Every security camera felt like it was tracking his movements. He ducked into an internet cafe and used a public computer to search for news about himself, but found nothing. As far as the digital world was concerned, Marcus Chen had never existed. The paranoia was overwhelming, but it wasn't entirely unjustified. 3 blocks from the internet cafe, Sarah Chen sat in her car watching Marcus through a telephoto lens as he stumbled through the streets like a man losing his mind. She had spent the morning putting the finishing touches on her plan, and everything was proceeding exactly as she had anticipated. Jennifer Martinez was not dead, despite what the local news was reporting. She was currently in protective custody, having been contacted by Sarah 3 days earlier and warned that she was being stalked by a dangerous individual. The fake news story had been surprisingly easy to arrange. A few strategic phone calls, some doctored photographs, and a contact at the newspaper who owed Sarah a favor. The real Jennifer was staying with relatives in another state until Sarah could guarantee her safety. The body that had been discovered in Jennifer's apartment was actually a sophisticated mannequin, photographed from angles that made identification impossible. By tomorrow, the story would be quietly retracted as a case of mistaken identity. But by then, Marcus Chen would no longer be a threat to anyone. Sarah had learned long ago that the most effective way to neutralize a predator was to make them feel like prey. Marcus was experiencing the same helplessness and terror that he had planned to inflict on Jennifer Martinez. The gun in his jacket provided him with the illusion of power, But Sarah knew that fear would eventually drive him to make the mistake she was waiting for. The mistake came sooner than expected. Marcus had spent the afternoon wandering through the city, growing more desperate and paranoid with each passing hour. As evening approached, he found himself in a residential neighborhood, standing across the street from a house that looked warm and inviting. Through the windows, he could see a family having dinner. A mother, father, and young daughter, who reminded him painfully of happier times. The sight triggered something primal in Marcus's deteriorating mental state. These people had what he had lost: security, belonging, a normal life. It wasn't fair that they should be safe and happy while his world crumbled around him. Someone needed to pay for what had happened to him, and if he couldn't find the mysterious Sarah Chen, then someone else would have to do. Marcus crossed the street and walked up to the front door, his hand gripping the gun in his jacket. He had no clear plan, only a desperate need to regain some sense of control over his situation. When the father answered his knock, Marcus pushed his way inside and pulled out the weapon. "Nobody move," he ordered, his voice high and unstable. "Nobody call for help, or I'll shoot." The family, a man named David Walsh, his wife Michelle, and their 8-year-old daughter Emma, huddled together on the living room couch, too shocked to do anything but comply. David positioned himself protectively in front of his wife and daughter, his mind racing to find a way to defuse the situation. "Please," David said calmly. "We don't want any trouble. If you need money, I can give you whatever cash I have." "I don't want money," Marcus snapped, pacing back and forth in front of the family. "I want my life back. I want the person who destroyed everything to pay for what they did." Michelle Walsh recognized the signs of a complete mental breakdown and tried to keep her voice steady. "What happened to you? Maybe we can help somehow." "Drana. Goaded in 21C. Diesmel." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Help? You want to help? Then tell me how someone can just erase a person from existence. Tell me how someone can make you disappear from every database, every record, every trace that you ever lived." The Walshes exchanged confused glances. They had no idea what Marcus was talking about, but they could see that he was completely unhinged and likely to do something violent at any moment. Outside the house, Sarah Chen crouched in the shadows of the neighboring yard, watching the scene through the living room window. She had been following Marcus all day, waiting for him to make exactly this kind of desperate move. Everything was proceeding according to plan, but the presence of innocent civilians complicated things considerably. Sarah had many skills, but her greatest talent was her ability to read people and predict their behavior. Marcus was spiraling toward a complete break with reality, and his next actions would likely be irreversible. She needed to intervene before the situation escalated further, but she also needed to do it in a way that would accomplish her ultimate goal. Moving with practiced silence, Sarah made her way to the back of the house and tested the kitchen door. It was unlocked, as she had expected. Most people in this neighborhood trusted their sense of security enough to be careless about such things. She slipped inside and made her way toward the living room, staying low and keeping to the shadows. Through the doorway, she could see Marcus waving the gun erratically, while the Walsh family sat frozen with terror on their couch. "It's not fair," Marcus was saying, his voice becoming more agitated with each word. "I was just trying to protect people. I was trying to stop monsters like my brother. But she turned me into the monster instead." Sarah realized that Marcus had completely rewritten history in his own mind. He now believed that he had been trying to protect Jennifer Martinez rather than harm her. The cognitive dissonance of accepting his own predatory behavior was too much for his psyche to handle. So he had constructed a narrative where he was the hero of his own story. "Who did this to you?" David Walsh asked, trying to keep Marcus talking and hopefully calm him down. "The Night Forest Phantom," Marcus said, the words dripping with hatred. "That's what the newspapers call her. She kills people and makes them disappear. She killed my brother, and now she's trying to kill me too." Sarah almost smiled at the irony. Marcus was absolutely correct about her intentions, but for completely wrong reasons. She hadn't killed Robert Haynes because he was Marcus's brother. She had killed him because he was a predator who had escaped justice. Marcus's own predatory behavior had simply made him the next logical target. "Maybe if you put the gun down, we can figure this out together," Michelle Walsh suggested gently. "Maybe we can help you find this person." "No," Marcus said, raising the weapon toward the family. "She's too smart for that. She's been playing games with me this whole time. She wanted me to come here. She wanted me to threaten innocent people, so she could justify what she's going to do to me." The accuracy of this statement caught Sarah off guard. Marcus was more perceptive than she had given him credit for. He had correctly identified that he was being manipulated, even if he didn't understand the larger context of why. "But if that's true," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a manic edge, "then she's watching right now. She's somewhere nearby, waiting for the perfect moment to make her move." Marcus spun around to face the windows, searching the darkness outside for any sign of movement. "I know you're out there," he called out loudly. "I know you're watching. Come and face me like the monster you are." Sarah weighed her options carefully. She could wait for Marcus to exhaust himself emotionally and hope that the situation would resolve itself peacefully. She could create a distraction and try to incapacitate him without putting the family at risk. Or she could give Marcus exactly what he was asking for: a direct confrontation that would end this nightmare once and for all. The decision was made for her when 8-year-old Emma Walsh began to cry softly, the sound apparently triggering something violent in Marcus's unstable mind. "Shut up," he screamed, pointing the gun directly at the child. "Shut up, or I'll make you stop crying permanently." Sarah didn't hesitate. She stepped into the living room doorway with her hands visible and empty. "Here I am, Marcus," she said calmly. "Let the family go, and we can finish what we started in the warehouse." Marcus spun around to face her, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and vindication. "I knew it. I knew you were here. You were right about everything," Sarah continued, taking a small step into the room. "I've been watching you, manipulating you, leading you exactly where I wanted you to go. But these people have nothing to do with our business." "They have everything to do with it," Marcus snarled. "They're witnesses. They've seen my face. They know I was here." "No," Sarah said firmly. "They're innocent. Just like Jennifer Martinez was innocent. Just like all of Robert's victims were innocent." Marcus's face contorted with rage at the mention of his brother. Robert was innocent too. Those women lied about him. Robert kept photographs, Marcus, detailed journals, audio recordings. I found them all in your storage unit, along with your own additions to the collection. The color drained from Marcus's face. "Those weren't mine. I never..." You never what?" "Never planned to use Robert's methods on Jennifer Martinez? Never spent weeks learning her schedule and finding ways into her apartment? Never wrote detailed fantasies about what you wanted to do to her?" Marcus was backing toward the windows now, the gun wavering between Sarah and the Walsh family. "You don't understand. I wasn't going to hurt her. I was just trying to understand what Robert went through. By recreating his crimes? By trying to see things from his perspective," Marcus said desperately. "I thought if I could understand how he thought, I could prove that he was innocent." Marcus said. Sarah shook her head sadly. "You knew he was guilty, Marcus. You found his collection, and instead of turning it over to the police, you decided to add to it. You weren't trying to prove Robert's innocence. You were trying to continue his work." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. Deep down, he had known exactly what Robert was, and what he himself was becoming. The elaborate justifications and self-deceptions couldn't change the fundamental facts of what he had planned to do to Jennifer Martinez. "Please let the family go," Sarah said again, taking another step forward. "This is between you and me." Marcus looked at the Walsh family huddled on the couch, then back at Sarah standing in the doorway. For a moment, something like clarity flickered in his eyes. "If I let them go, you'll kill me," he said quietly. "Yes," Sarah replied without hesitation. I will. The honesty of her answer seemed to calm Marcus somehow. The pretense was finally over, and both of them could acknowledge what this encounter was really about. Robert deserved better than this, Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. Robert got exactly what he deserved, Sarah replied. And so will you. Marcus nodded slowly, as if accepting the inevitable. Will you make it quick? Quicker than you planned for Jennifer. Marcus looked at the gun in his hand one last time, then slowly lowered it to his side. Let them go first. Let them leave the house. Sarah gestured toward the Walsh family without taking her eyes off Marcus. Go, she said quietly. Walk out the front door. And don't look back. David Walsh gathered his wife and daughter and moved toward the hallway, pausing only to look back at the woman who had somehow appeared to save them. Thank you, he whispered. Sarah didn't acknowledge the gratitude. Her attention was focused entirely on Marcus, who stood by the window like a man awaiting execution. When the front door closed behind the Walsh family, the house fell silent, except for the sound of two people breathing. How many others? Marcus asked. 47 before you. All like Robert? All like Robert. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was something almost peaceful in his expression. I'm not going to make this easy for you, he said, raising the gun. I didn't expect you to, Sarah replied. The confrontation that followed would be over in seconds, but the aftermath would ripple through both their lives in ways neither of them could anticipate. Marcus raised the gun with surprising speed, but 15 years of hunting predators had given Sarah reflexes that bordered on supernatural. She moved like liquid shadow, dropping low and rolling behind the Walsh family's coffee table as Marcus fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The bullets shattered a picture frame and punched holes in the wall where she had been standing moments before. Sarah came up from her roll with a ceramic lamp in her hand, hurling it at Marcus's head with deadly accuracy. He ducked to avoid it, momentarily losing sight of his target. And when he looked up again, Sarah was already closing the distance between them. The gun went off a 4th time as Sarah grabbed Marcus's wrist and twisted it upward, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling. They struggled for control of the weapon, crashing into the Walsh family's bookshelf and sending volumes of family photos and novels cascading to the floor. Marcus was younger and stronger, but Sarah fought with the calculated efficiency of someone who had survived dozens of similar encounters. She drove her elbow into his solar plexus, causing him to double over in pain, then followed up with a knee strike that would have ended the fight if Marcus hadn't twisted away at the last second. The gun skittered across the hardwood floor as both combatants lost their grip on it. Marcus lunged for the weapon, but Sarah was faster. She reached it first and spun around to find Marcus charging at her with a knife he had pulled from somewhere on his person. Stop, Sarah commanded. The gun trained on Marcus's center mass. Marcus didn't stop. The knife blade caught the light from the overhead fixture as he closed the final few feet between them, his face twisted with a mixture of grief and rage that had finally found its target. Sarah pulled the trigger twice. The first bullet caught Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around but not stopping his forward momentum. The second bullet found its mark in his chest, directly over his heart. Marcus took 2 more steps before collapsing to his knees, the knife falling from his nerveless fingers. Why? He whispered, blood beginning to foam at the corners of his mouth. Sarah knelt beside him, watching as the life faded from his eyes. Because someone has to stop the monsters, she said quietly. And sometimes the monsters don't know they're monsters. Marcus tried to say something else, but the words were lost in a gurgle of blood. He slumped forward, and Sarah checked his pulse to confirm what she already knew. Marcus Chen was dead, and the world was a slightly safer place because of it. The cleanup took Sarah exactly 43 minutes. She had performed this ritual so many times that she could work almost automatically, her hands moving through the familiar motions, while her mind focused on the larger implications of what had just occurred. First, she removed all traces of her own presence from the scene. Every surface she had touched was wiped clean. Every fiber that might have transferred from her clothing was carefully collected. The ceramic lamp she had thrown was cleaned of fingerprints and repositioned as if it had never been disturbed. Next, She staged the scene to tell the story she wanted the police to discover. Marcus Chen had forced his way into the Walsh home, threatened the family, and been shot during a struggle for his weapon. The ballistics would show that he had been killed with his own gun, and the knife beside his body would support the narrative of a violent home invasion gone wrong. Sarah planted evidence that she had collected from Marcus's apartment earlier in the day. Items that would connect him to the harassment of Jennifer Martinez and raise questions about his mental state. The police would discover that Marcus had been obsessed with the fictional Night Forest Phantom and had apparently suffered a complete psychological breakdown. Most importantly, Sarah ensured that there was no trace of Jennifer Martinez's supposed death. By morning, the fake news story would be quietly retracted, and Jennifer herself would return from her protective custody with a story about visiting relatives. The whole elaborate deception would disappear as if it had never existed. When Sarah was satisfied that the scene would pass forensic inspection, she slipped out of the house through the same back door she had used to enter. The Walsh family was waiting in their car 2 blocks away, having followed Sarah's instructions to drive to the local police station and report the home invasion. By the time the authorities arrived at the house, Sarah would be miles away. But something felt different this time. As Sarah drove through the empty streets toward her apartment, she found herself thinking about Marcus Chen's final question. Why had she done this? The answer had always been simple before. She eliminated predators to protect innocent people. The moral calculus was straightforward, and the results spoke for themselves. Marcus had been different, though. He hadn't yet crossed the line from planning to action. Unlike the 47 monsters she had eliminated before him, Marcus had been caught in the planning stages of his first real crime. Sarah had essentially killed a man for his intentions, rather than his actions. The rationalization came easily enough. Marcus had Robert's entire collection of trophies and evidence, which made him an accessory after the fact to his brother's crimes. His surveillance of Jennifer Martinez had crossed into stalking, which was itself a crime. Most importantly, Sarah's experience told her that Marcus would eventually have acted on his dark fantasies if left unchecked. But doubt was a luxury that Sarah couldn't afford in her line of work. Second-guessing her decisions would eventually get innocent people killed. She had learned to trust her instincts and accept the consequences of her choices, no matter how difficult they might be. The doubt persisted, however, as Sarah cleaned her weapons and disposed of her clothing in the industrial incinerator she had installed in her apartment building's basement. For the first time in 15 years, she wondered if she was becoming the very thing she had sworn to eliminate. The thought was interrupted by the sound of her secure phone ringing. Only 3 people had this number, and 2 of them were supposed to be dead. Sarah? The voice was female, young, and terrified. Jennifer? How did you get this number? Detective Morrison gave it to me. She said you were the one who saved my life. Sarah closed her eyes and silently cursed the one law enforcement contact she maintained for emergencies. Detective Rachel Morrison was supposed to limit her communications with Sarah to life-or-death situations, and giving out her secure number definitely violated their agreement. You're supposed to be in protective custody, Sarah said. I was, but I came back early. Yes, he's dead. You're safe now. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Detective Morrison told me what you do. She said you've saved a lot of people like me. Detective Morrison talks too much. I wanted to thank you, Jennifer continued. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't warned me about him. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. Gratitude was another luxury she couldn't afford. It made the work personal, and personal feelings led to mistakes. You don't need to thank me, Sarah said. Just live your life and try to stay safe. Is there anything I can do? Any way I can help? The offer was tempting. Sarah had always worked alone, but her network of informants and contacts was getting smaller every year. Having someone on the inside of normal society could be valuable for gathering information and maintaining her cover identity. But involving Jennifer Martinez would also put the girl at risk. And Sarah had done this work specifically to protect innocent people like her. No, Sarah said firmly. The best thing you can do is forget this ever happened and go back to your normal life. But Sarah ended the call and turned off the phone. She would need to have a serious conversation with Detective Morrison about operational security. But that could wait until tomorrow. Right now, she needed to process what had happened with Marcus Chen and figure out why this particular elimination felt so different from all the others. The answer came to her as she stood in her shower, washing away the last traces of the evening's work. Marcus Chen had been her first mistake. Not a mistake in the sense that he hadn't deserved to die. The evidence of his intentions was overwhelming, and Sarah had no doubt that he would have eventually acted on his plans to assault Jennifer Martinez. The mistake was in how she had approached the situation. For 15 years, Sarah had been reactive rather than proactive. She found monsters who had already crossed the line into violence, studied their patterns, and eliminated them before they could hurt more people. Her victims had been chosen based on their past actions, not their future intentions. Marcus Chen had been different because Sarah had intervened before he could complete his first assault. She had essentially traveled backward along his timeline, eliminating him for crimes he would have committed rather than crimes he had already committed. The philosophical implications were staggering. If Sarah could justify killing Marcus for his future crimes, then theoretically she could justify killing anyone whose psychological profile suggested they might become dangerous. The line between justice and murder would disappear entirely. But the practical implications were even more troubling. If Sarah had made one mistake in her assessment of Marcus's character, then she might have killed an innocent man who would have ultimately pulled back from the edge of violence on his own. Sarah had always prided herself on being methodical and careful in her work. She spent months studying her targets, gathering evidence, and confirming their guilt before taking action. The Marcus Chen situation had forced her to act more quickly than usual, and the rushed timeline might have led to errors in judgment. As Sarah lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the city beyond her windows, she made a decision that would change the trajectory of her entire mission. She would take a break from active hunting to reassess her methods and criteria for selecting targets. The decision felt like a betrayal of all the innocent people who might be hurt while she took time for introspection. But Sarah knew that continuing her work without addressing these doubts would be even more dangerous. A hunter who questioned her own judgment was a liability to everyone she was trying to protect. Sarah's retirement lasted exactly 18 hours. The call came from Detective Morrison at 7 in the morning, rousing Sarah from the first peaceful sleep she'd had in weeks. "We have a problem," Morrison said without preamble. "A big one." Sarah sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves 3 more bodies and a note specifically addressed to the Night Forest Phantom." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What does the note say?" "It says, 'Thank you for showing me the way. The real work begins now.' It's signed, 'A Grateful Student.'" Sarah closed her eyes and felt the weight of 15 years of careful work crashing down around her. Someone had been watching her methods, learning from her techniques, and now they were applying those lessons to their own twisted agenda. "Where?" Sarah asked, already reaching for her clothes. "Warehouse District. Same area where you had your encounter with Marcus Chen last night." "How do you know about that?" "Because one of the victims is Marcus Chen. Someone dug up his body and arranged it with 2 others in what looks like some kind of shrine." "Sarah, I think you've got a copycat." Sarah was already moving toward her weapon cabinet. The break from hunting was over before it had truly begun. She had created a monster of her own, and now she would have to destroy it before it could hurt any more innocent people. But as Sarah prepared for what might be the most dangerous hunt of her career, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real monster she needed to eliminate was staring back at her from the bathroom mirror. The Night Forest Phantom was being hunted, and for the first time in 15 years, Sarah Chen wasn't sure if she was the predator or the prey. The game had changed, and the stakes had never been higher. Somewhere in the city, a new killer was using Sarah's own methods against innocent victims, and they had made it personal by desecrating Marcus Chen's gravesite. The message was clear. They wanted a confrontation with the legendary Night Forest Phantom. Sarah checked her weapons one final time and headed for the door. She had spent 15 years perfecting the art of eliminating monsters. But now she would have to face the possibility that the greatest monster of all might be the one she had created through her own actions. The hunt for monster number 49 was about to begin, and this time Sarah wasn't sure who would survive the encounter.